everyone. Welcome to the Lost Minds podcast. It's been a little bit of time, but we are back. My name is Emily.
I'm Anthony.
And today we are going to be chatting about a few different stories, some really good stories for y'all as our episodes come back on. So we have, first, we're going to be talking about the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I get that mixed up. But yeah, we're going to be talking about that in their recent release of a few executive agenda items that they are going to be pressuring Biden to implement in the upcoming weeks. And we're also going to be talking about Biden's budget stuff. One part of it is that he is proposing an $813 billion Pentagon budget, which is a $31 billion increase from last year's budget. And then also we're going to be talking about him proposing to add $32 billion to spending for funding the police. So we're going to talk about those two stories as well. We were gone for a little bit due to some family issues, some family emergencies and stuff. But we're back and we're excited to continue to start making episodes again. One thing that's happened since we were gone is the Lost Minds podcast joined the End the Two-Party System Network, which is a network of various political ideology type podcasts that we're all talking about our common goal around ending the two-party system. So if you want to check out our work on End the Two-Party System Network, go check them out on YouTube and also support their work by volunteering, donating, buying merch, all the good things. But you can go check out the link down in the description. I'll leave their channel below and all of their resources to check them out. We've been really enjoying doing episodes on that network and got a lot of support for the show. So super excited to be back on our own channel though as well and doing episodes again for y'all. Sorry that we keep taking these long breaks, but you know, we don't do this for a living. This is just an extra little hobby of ours. And so we do what we can when we can. We're excited to be back. So
Back like we never left.
Back
baby.
like never before. So there may be a few episodes from End the Two-Party System that we will upload to the Lost Minds podcast. So if you hear any conversation in those related to End the Two-Party System, it's probably because we're double sharing those on each of the channels. But yeah, that's just for future reference. And yeah, go check us out over there as well. So let's jump into the first story. Our first story is going to be about the Congressional Progressive Caucus and their executive actions that they are presenting to Joe Biden and have support from various entities such as the Working Families Party and Our Revolution, People's Action, and many more. So we're going to go into a little bit about like the list of actions that they are offering Joe Biden. And then also talking a little bit about our analysis of it, how it's related to, you know, issues such as the ratchet effect, the rotating villain that we've talked about before. And yeah, just our overall assessment on where this is going to go in the future. So we'll get into that story first and then continue on with the show. So next, we're going to go into the climate crisis and what it says about our fossil fuel dependence. So this part of the list says explicitly combating the climate crisis and reducing fossil fuel dependence. So again, we're the Progressive Caucus, and we're talking about reducing
real dodgy with
fossil fuel dependence. So yeah, that's the first thing that is a red flag to me. Like just the use of the word reduce is a huge red flag for a Progressive Caucus. It talks about declaring a ban on new fossil fuel leases and on federal lands and waters and in environmental justice communities. So all the existing fossil fuel leases, we're good with those. Those can stay. That's totally fine. But we are going to declare a ban on any new fossil fuel leases. So line 3, line 5, I think one of it was the Dakota Access Pipeline or one of them that he got rid of, but then brought back or something. So all of those ones, totally cool. Like we can keep all of those, the tar sand, plants that they have, and we're all good. No problem there. All the Marathon petroleum plants that have been polluting people in Detroit where we live for years now, causing people to have cancer, other diseases, all that stuff. Those are totally fine. Any new ones though, yeah, no, we're not good with those. So again, half measures, incrementalism. It's in the name.
That shit.
It's in the title.
Literally gonna kill us. Like
we're trying to reduce. It's in the title, so you know right then and there. Anything else that's said below it is like that means nothing.
Right.
Literally means nothing. And these are the people who championed the Green New Deal. who championed the Green New Deal in order to get elected. So again, just one part of that. And then also investing in the next section is investing in care, economy, jobs, and standards. This is just a bunch of random stuff to me. They mentioned a few things for like childcare, raising wages for certain like childcare folks. It says expanding access to in-home care for veterans and creating union jobs. Great. Grow strong childcare worker unions, allowing workers to organize. Great, whatever. It says encouraging the implementation of Medicaid equal access rule that reflects the role of the workforce in ensuring access to health services. So I was, just for context, I was a certified nursing assistant and I used to work in a nursing home. And this, I'm reading off of the like one pager doc that they have. So a lot of this is reduced language, and the actual list, there's a little more. And in this section, they talk a lot about like raising standards for people who work in nursing homes to make sure that folks in nursing homes are treated more, with more care, treated better, all this different stuff, or, increasing standards to those things. But let me tell you that CNAs are the most underpaid, one of the most underpaid jobs in the healthcare industry. Like I was paid $10.25 when I was a CNA, working 10-hour shifts every single day of the week, doing extremely intensive work with long care patients and taking care of them. We were the lowest paid CNAs in our state in Michigan. I'm sure that there's a ton of CNAs that are paid way less in other states as well. So I just think it's funny that they're talking about, which it is not, again, is not a bad thing to increase standards for folks that they have better care, but also the standards are pretty high already. And the people who are doing this work are also being extremely underpaid. So maybe these workers would do a little bit more and would be willing to care for these people a little bit better if they weren't overworked and underpaid. But we're not willing to raise their wages. We're just willing to increase the high standards that are put on them. So I wanted to point that out in this section. Other than that, it seems like a bunch of random stuff. Like we're talking about investing in the economy and job standards, and we're talking about like just childcare workers and just allowing them to unionize. We're just going to allow them to unionize as if that shouldn't already be a thing. Like, so really, again, just kind of random stuff here. Nothing that the people would jump out and say like, yes, this is something I've been fighting for a really long time. And then the last part is regulate for economic and tax fairness. So again, this just doesn't really seem like enough. Nothing really stands out in this section. It's a lot of like stuff that even I, to be quite honest, wouldn't even know. It like talks about like closing loopholes that allows Wall Street executives to pay lower taxes, reversing Trump era regulations. I don't know if that means that older regulations would also be included in that. But for like offshore tax loopholes, stuff like that. And then also talking about public companies being required to disclose information about greenhouse gas emissions. So they can still do so. They just have to disclose it to everyone. So again, just a bunch of random stuff and stuff that just seems like it's not enough. Like none of it really stands out. So that's the whole list. And I think that overall, I would say this list is absolutely ridiculous. It's a complete joke. I haven't seen anything that's more of a joke than this, to be quite honest, come from. Maybe I have, but for them to pretend that this is such a huge battle that they're fighting and win that they're trying to get is just insane to me. And I really wanted to focus too heavily on the organizations that are supporting this, namely the Working Families Party and Our Revolution, who we know is very like reformist, but also still stands out to me as something that's wrong. And then also like People's Action, all these different really progressive, seemingly progressive organizations that have a lot of people. Let me tell you, I've been a part of some of these. I was kind of working with People's Action for a little bit. I've dabbled in some of these when I did work for a lot of progressive folks in the Democratic Party, when I still subscribe to that. And these people who are involved deeply believe in these organizations and they deeply believe in change, and they are struggling. Like these are not people, some of the people that are involved in DSA and these organizations are well off and they don't understand the struggles of people. And that is true. But there are also a lot of people in these organizations who really believe that these organizations are doing something for them. And they truly need support and help because they are struggling so hard. And it just kills me. It literally kills me.
That's sad.
To see that these organizations are supporting something like this. Like I said, not everything in this list is awful. It's not. But this list doesn't go far enough. The only good thing out of this list is canceling student loan debt. And there are plenty of other areas and avenues to this list that they could have had much stronger demands. And to be quite honest, I haven't seen a huge organizing strategy around getting this list even accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, to me, this just seems like a political theater.
It's not 2002 anymore. You can't just be like, hey, we're for good things.
Right.
And they're for bad things. Vote for us. Yeah. No, like, give us details. Mm-hmm. Dude, like, what the heck?
Yep.
Like,
and do something.
Can't just trust you based on your word or some stupid ass bill that you just conjured up. I hear people
always talk about, like, how dare you come after AOC and Corey, but like, they're activists. They're elected activists. It's like, why don't they show it then? If you're an activist and you're an organizer, I'm an activist. I'm an organizer. I organize with 3 different organizations currently, few that are national and a few that are in Michigan. This is not how you organize. I'm telling you right now, they want to get down on people for March for Medicare for All, for not being professional organizers and activists, for not being good enough, for not having the right credentials, for not knowing the right people. Y'all know all of those things. Y'all have all those things, and you don't do anything. You don't do anything that regular organizers do. I don't see you building relationships with people. I don't see you mobilizing your base. I don't see you doing any of that. So you don't know anything about organizing. You don't know anything about activism. And all you do is want to get people down. So the people that are actually trying to combat the Democratic Party, the 2-party system, and all you're trying to do is tear those people down and burn those people out. There's so many situations in this country that burn people out already. Capitalism and what's going on internationally, and people's families that live internationally, and just the idea of having to work a job that works you 6 to 7 days a week. You don't have any time for yourself, your family, to work on your passions, to take care of yourself. And then we're all preached about self-care and how much we need to do self-care. It's like, honestly, like grow up, like be attached to reality. That's not the reality of the situation. And honestly, they don't have any high ground to talk about organizing with other people and what other people are doing. And that's just what it is. Like, I haven't even seen them organize to get this list done. And this list came out last week, maybe the week before that. And I haven't seen a huge phone banking campaign. I haven't seen a rally being, advertised. And if it is advertised, I haven't seen it. And let me tell you, I'm on Twitter all the time. So if it was advertised and it is something that they'd be doing, I should have seen it by now.
It was covert.
I should have seen it by now. AOC is plenty friendly with CNN. We should have seen it by now. Like, I'm sorry, but it is what it is.
Progressives. You pissed Emily off today.
Got me in that mood. God. I'm fired up. But yeah, that's the list. That's the big thing. This is a big, topic. Again, I think a lot of people are going to think that this is good. And the idea of having a list of executive actions that you're trying to push Biden to achieve is a good thing. The stuff in this list is an extreme half measure. This is really just, to me, this is them trying to save face and build clout for the Democratic Party so that they can somewhat save some seats in the midterms.
And once again, they completely alienate themselves because, our conservatives and like libertarians and people, they're going to be like, oh my God, look at what the communists and the progressive caucus want to do. And then the people who are actually like Marxist Leninists like us are mad at you. So everybody's just going to be pissed at you. So it's like, what are they doing? Yeah. There's no strategy behind any of this. There isn't.
You hate to see it. It's political theater. Yeah. It's political theater.
All right. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is the proposal that Biden has put forward. He wants to increase the military budget to, what was it, $813 billion, which is insane. I guarantee you, after you get the cost of every little thing, we're going to be spending well over $1 trillion on our military when it's all said and done. Which, I mean, I can't even wrap my head around that. That's insanity, but we'll get into that a little bit more. So we're going to be reading from this article. It's a Substack article.
It is written by Stephen Semler. Yeah, we'll link it below.
Stephen Semler. All right, so starts off with the White House released Joe Biden's budget request for fiscal year 2023 today. or at least a formal preview of the forthcoming full version. While the budget framework leaves a lot of stuff out, there's more than enough in here to gauge the Biden administration's priorities. So, and this is an increase of, I think, $30 billion.
31 billion.
31 billion. Mm-hmm. Sweet.
31 billion. So, the analysis says Biden's budget request is tantamount to climate change denialism, and no amount of climate conscious discourse changes that. This specific article talks about how he's spending way less, the comparison between how much he's spending on climate change and climate efforts relate as opposed to how much he's spending on the military budget, the Pentagon budget. So that's why a lot of this article talks about climate change. But in the funding proposal, the Biden administration mentions some version of tackling the climate crisis about 11 different times. However, there's not enough climate money in the spending plan to take those assurances seriously. Apparently, there's roughly $44.9 billion going to the climate, as opposed to $831 billion for the military budget, the Pentagon budget. I don't know if those are the same things. Are those the same things? I'd say they were.
I'm pretty sure I've heard people call.
Okay, cool. So yeah, the military budget. So it's huge difference, obviously. Like,
oh yeah,
astronomical. We're gonna show a graph as well that's in this article too, but yeah, it goes on to say that an underfunded climate response is a problem, regardless of whether it's accompanied by a radically overfunded military budget. So, this is a huge issue regardless of the military budget, but it is really telling just because military related emissions are a big reason why climate change gets worse every single year. And based on most recently available data, the U.S. military-industrial complex pollutes more than 171 countries. So just the fact that those two things are in the same budget is kind of telling of the Joe Biden administration and why and how this, fiscal budget is, working out. So, Anthony, I'll let you chat about this graph a little bit. It's pretty much just a reflection of what we just talked about. But
yeah, it points out how the Biden's proposed budget spends 18 times more on the Pentagon than on climate programs. Mm-hmm. Good God.
But it also talks about the climate crisis and addressing it at least 11 different times in the budget.
Yeah.
So
I bet it does.
Yeah.
Good fucking God.
And then you have the story we just talked about, which was the Congressional Caucus talking about reducing our fossil fuel dependency, reducing climate change. It all just kind of comes together in one neat little nice package.
That's funny because I think it's a valid point here to point out that a lot of what we do with the military is for natural resources and fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So you're gonna say that you're gonna cut down on that, you're gonna address that, but then you're gonna bolster the military up, which is already the biggest military in human history and is like bigger than the next like 10 countries combined. It's crazy. And then like we'll talk about the Russia and Ukraine stuff and how that ties into it.
But it's just funny too that like when Joe Biden was running, it was like part of why I was told I needed to vote for Joe Biden was because of like the BLM stuff that was going on. And the other half was, and the part of it was COVID. And then the other part of it was the climate. Like everyone was so convinced that Joe Biden was actually going to do something about climate change, and Trump would never do anything about climate change and would make it astronomically worse. When like that's just not the case. Obviously, we're seeing with like the way that he's working with the Progressive Caucus to not have any significant change on the climate, and then also just proposing such a weak budget for climate change in relation to the Pentagon budget, any of these things. And also just the fact like that Joe Biden has said that he would veto Medicare for all anytime it came on his desk because of the cost of Medicare for all, when he's putting $813 billion towards the Pentagon budget and is increasing. That's an increase of $31 billion from last year. So it's just, it doesn't add up. It doesn't, I mean, it makes sense. We all know why it makes sense, but it's really funny at this point how like blatant they are with it.
Oh yeah. It's right in your face. They're just like, yeah, we're just going to write blank checks for war. And then when you're like, hey, we could use this for literally anything else that could do something for any human being. And like, fuck no, get out of here.
Was last year's budget done by Joe Biden again, like 2021, or was that
Oh, that's a good question.
Regardless, my
Wow.
point that I was going to make was just that it keeps increasing. So regardless, it keeps increasing, whether it's, Trump, all these
Oh yeah.
issues keep increasing. So the Pentagon budget never decreases, or it doesn't stay the same. Like, it always increases. So that's just one part of it. But
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've seen numbers like $30 billion would end homelessness
yeah.
or starvation in America alone.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, and we're just sitting here increasing the military budget every year by 30, 40. Trump did by like $80 billion, which would cover the cost of Americans' college tuition.
Yep. They couldn't give us
For
stimulus
10
checks.
years.
They promised people, when people voted for those two Democrats to get into the Senate in 2020, that they were going to give us more stimulus checks, $2,000 stimulus checks, which we deserved. Our whole salaries being paid, to be quite honest. And a lot of other countries were doing that, but they couldn't even give us $2,000.
Mhm.
So it's just all this stuff shows you how little they actually do give a shit about regular people, and how, like, you voting for him got you nothing. It materially got
Right.
you nothing, and it put you in a worse situation, because we now have these, gas prices that are super high. Inflation is a huge thing right now. Everything, even at the store, like things that I used to pay $1 for, are almost two bucks or more now. So everything is getting more expensive. The cost of living is more expensive. The housing market, buying a house is virtually impossible right now, even if you don't have student loan debt. All these things combined, it's just, to see that this is where our money is going instead of actually helping people is absolutely insane, and should tell everyone why they need to stop voting for Democrats. But to me, I wanted us to talk about manufacturing consent with the Ukraine situation, because I think this is just one way that folks have been up in arms. Like, people have been up in arms about the defense budget in the past. I think the 2020 election got us talking about those kinds of things. But then once Ukraine happened, I think that this whole increase in the, Pentagon budget and the military budget isn't going to be talked about by people who support Democrats. It's only going to be talked, or even people that used to be on the left, or a part of the old left. That's not going to be talked about by them. It's going to be talked about people on the new left, because we are principled on this issue. But I think that the Democrats have done such a good job, and the media has done such a good job of manufacturing consent when it comes to the Ukraine situation. I think they're manufacturing consent to continue taking our tax dollars and the money that the government could be putting to help us into the Pentagon budget. This is just a way to get us to shut up about it.
Right. And it's not even just our government that's increasing the military budget. It's every NATO country, it's every Western country. They're doing it as well. Which benefits the establishment in our country, because then that gives them more money to buy arms from us, the biggest weapon dealers in the world. So yeah, all that is connected. I mean, if you just think about the timeline, I mean, the Ukraine crisis that happened, what, like 2-3 weeks ago, and then boom, this comes out. It's just a justification for this. And a good point here, Biden can propose $813 billion towards the military budget, but would veto Medicare for all because of its cost, which he was quoted. I mean, that's literally what he said, as the reason for that. So,
yeah,
it's crazy because Medicare for all would because one, there's I'm not gonna get too much into it, but there's mechanizations for that to kind of pay for itself, and you could tax the richer people and like corporations and put that towards it and other things like that.
But even like a lot of March for Medicare for All, they're very explicit on the fact that they believe in the modern monetary theory of funding things like Medicare for All. Like, we don't need to even tax the rich. We don't need to tax regular people. Even like Bernie Sanders, I'm not against taxing the rich, but even Bernie Sanders had some sort of progressive tax plan that would, still tax regular people, but at a astronomically lower, cost than corporations and the rich. But it would also be, less also than your premium. So everyone would still be getting taxed, but there's becoming a much more of a kind of conversation about, like, this is funded by governments all around the world. Like, we don't need to tax our people in order to, have things like Medicare for all. So it's just funny to think that it's not like they're creating this money for the Pentagon budget. They're not like, this is money that they're creating in order to just make this happen. If they had to use our taxes for this would be a much more difficult process for them to do.
Yeah.
They're creating this money to put towards the Pentagon budget. So that's the really telling thing and like sinister thing about it is like they can't create money for us to have Medicare for all, but they can create money for.
They also put our tax dollars towards this shit.
They
too,
do, but like, I'm saying a $31 billion increase is not just your tax dollars.
No,
like,
no, I know.
That's money that they're pulling out of other programs, or they're pulling it out of thin air. Again, the government can produce money. And that's what they do. So they only do that for certain issues that they know will make them that money back, that will put it back in the pockets of the politicians that are making these decisions, from defense contractors and, arms dealers and all these different things. So, and it's just, to me, it was funny too, like even the fact, and that's why I asked about Trump making the 2021 budget or not, is just that folks were so up in arms too about like Trump's finger being on the red button. Like that was such a huge scare tactic, and even with the Ukraine and Russia situation, we've seen how Joe Biden has handled that. And that's one telling thing. But even now, him increasing the Pentagon budget, it's like, why aren't we scared that now his finger's on the red button?
Right.
And Trump did this too. And people were rightfully up in arms about it. But now that Joe Biden's doing it, I haven't heard people talk about this other than people that are on the left, the new left. I have not heard people that have previously supported Bernie Sanders or still do support Bernie Sanders or the squad talking about this issue. It's just, it's such a hypocritical thing.
That's how it works with presidents. Like,
it is.
Democratic presidents sometimes do like way more heinous shit because they know that people aren't paying attention.
Right.
Especially in like times of crisis, that's the perfect time to.
And that's why we talk so much about the Democratic Party, is because it's like people are aware, even Republicans are aware of who Republicans are. Like everyone's aware of who Republicans are. The Democratic Party, though, is so good at masking themselves, at making you believe. They're so good at manipulation. They're such an abusive institution. Like deeply, like practically and materially, they're obviously abusive and extremely violent, but also the Democratic Party in itself is also so mentally and emotionally abusive. They use fear and they use mental manipulation. Yeah, manipulation. They gaslight you into thinking that they're actually going to do something for you and that they're the lesser of two evils. So it's
Democratic Party, you're toxic.
You're too toxic.
You're fucking toxic. Fuck you.
But yeah, it's just really sad. Like I said, I've said this in the last, show, but it's just really sad that so many people count on the Democratic Party, and especially progressive folks in the Democratic Party, and they're truly struggling. Like I said, there are people that are well off that believe in the Democratic Party that aren't well connected to what struggling people are going through, but there's also struggling people who believe in them, and we need to get them to stop believing in them at some point. Like,
it's sad because like in their worldview, the Democrats are that's the party that gave my grandparents like rights and shit like that.
Yeah,
and they have that to like cling on, and they they have been for 60 years now, and they've been propagandizing everybody into believing that they're some like safe haven.
But even think about it, the people who have received those rights and those valuable things from the Democratic Party were mostly white people who also were in a part of the middle to working class. Like the New Deal didn't address any, didn't do anything for Black people. There's plenty of communities that were left out of the New Deal, proposals and policies. So
when you really get into the research too, like LBJ like fucking hated Martin Luther King. Like he fucking hated him. He called him the N-word all the time.
You got to think about how now that translates to what they're doing right now which is what we just talked about with the progressive caucus executive actions, is like they're leaving certain communities out. They do these half measures to leave certain communities out, to make some communities disposable and others not. And that's just a continuation. And no wonder why it's mostly white Democrats that you hear talking about, we have to vote for Democrats because Trump bad, because Trump says racist things, because Trump does this and Trump does that. All of their stance against oppression is so surface level. It's what I just talked about in the last story about how, even with the BLM stuff, like they did it for clout. Most of what white Democrats and white progressives, leftists who supported Bernie Sanders, I put them in that same boat now because they do the same thing. They gaslight you about caring about people, about being truly against oppression, but then they'll tell you to go vote for, the Democratic Party. So it's a generational continuation of my family got well off from the New Deal, from half measures from Democrats, and we're going to continue that cycle even into 2022 when everyday people are struggling regardless of who you are and what you identify of. But that's why some people struggle more than others. And it's just a continuation of that. Like, it's more sinister to me that white people are telling you to stay within the Democratic Party when they're the ones that have been afforded mostly the benefits of the Democratic Party, So it frustrates me to see white leftists do that. It frustrates me to see white liberals do that, because they truly get people to believe that the Democratic Party in and of itself was always a good party when it never was.
Right. To add on to your point about like communities being left out, it is like an ironic thing to see, because like it's kind of like their own version of like divide and conquer, because they'll make the white liberals like so comfortable and whatever and believe that they're better than conservatives and Republicans because of like their support for minority groups. But then when like the black community or the gay community is like, hey, can you guys do this for us? Because you're not doing anything or not doing enough. You're just saying things. They're like, whoa, listen, brother. You gotta calm the fuck down. Wait 4 more years. We'll talk about it then.
That lady that called that told Nick from RBN that he was like against his own race, or he was racist, or he was like an Uncle Tom or something. Like, she said something really awful to him because he was criticizing Joe Biden or something. It's like, where do you think you have the fucking right? Like, where do you get off having the entitlement that you're able to do that? Like, and then those are the type of people that'll sit back and be like, I support black women because I am in support of this new Supreme Court justice, or I'm voting for Hillary Clinton, or I'm against oppression. I'm all for good things because I vote for the Democratic Party, but also I'm going to tell a black person that they're an Uncle Tom for not supporting exactly what I support. It's like, yeah, you're just a result of generations of white people getting more opportunities from Democrats.
To say to somebody,
it's not. It's not, but that's what I'm saying is that's what I'm saying is it's a result. It's not okay regardless. I don't care if you're even I don't care if you're a leftist who does support a lot of great things. I'm just saying it's funny how it all ties together in the fact of, well, they're results of generations of white families that have gotten more from Democrats and compared to other communities. And they continue to say stuff like that. And they continue to sheep herd people into the Democratic Party, even people of color, even people from marginalized communities. Can they somehow make them feel bad?
Right.
And that they're against their own communities if they don't do it. And it's like, no, really, you're the problem. So, yeah, that's just one thing. But we talked about Medicare for all and like the hypocritical stuff of that. And also just like the $45-ish billion for the climate. Like, Sunrise Movement and all these progressive organizations who talked about the climate crisis must feel stupid as fuck right now. Like, they honestly must feel so dumb. And a lot of like, even in, I forgot to mention in the last story, the Sunrise Movement also is supporting these Congressional Caucus executive actions. So
I'm shocked.
How? Like, literally in that list, it says reduce our fossil fuel dependency. It says nothing. That list has nothing to do with the Green New Deal. The Sunrise must have dropped the Green New Deal. They must have dropped it because there's no way that Sunrise should support that.
Everybody else has.
There's no way.
Right?
There's no way. So I just think it's incredibly frustrating. I won't get on my rant. My rant happened last story, but it's so frustrating. Like, these organizations do so fucking much to trick people. Like, they are also so fucking toxic and manipulative. People want to talk about the People's Party being toxic and manipulative. I'm not necessarily denying that, but why the fuck aren't we talking about DSA? Why the fuck aren't we talking about Sunrise and People's Action, all these working family also being extremely manipulative and abusive in toxic environments? These people are just as bad as the Democratic Party. They're just manipulating people into and using their fucking struggle and weaponizing it into making them feel like they're getting something. That's so fucked up. I truly don't understand how people can be a part of those spaces. I truly don't understand it. Like,
You're a meanie butt
Oh
for
my
doing
God.
that.
And I know a lot of folks who do great work in Sunrise at a student level or a, state level, who go to politicians' houses and stand outside their houses and actually do really, really risky direct actions. But I think the majority of, from what I've heard, the majority of folks from Sunrise local hubs do not like their national leadership. Like, they Sunrise has lost a lot of money. All these organizations have lost a lot of money giving stuff to progressives, and they're not getting it in return. They're not getting a lot of money back just from the result of their, shaming people to vote for Joe Biden. And they're not getting us anything. So I'm sure that they feel like, idiots right now because of this budget, and also because of the Congressional Caucus ass. Like, there's no way you feel like you're doing something at this point. There's no way. And if you do, you are completely, I mean, that is literally the definition of insanity.
Yeah. And I mean, this is why people hate the Democrats and why we've been throwing a shit fit since Joe Biden got nominated. So we saw this coming, and it wasn't hard to see it coming either, because this is what Obama did as well. And Bernie and the progressives should honestly be really ashamed of themselves also. Especially Bernie, like, he had a lot of political power. Even when he lost, he had a lot of political power. Like, the whole landscape and the scene of Biden's presidency could be way different right now if Bernie had said, no, like, fuck off. I'm not just gonna pledge my vote for you unless you agree to do these 7 things, or go crazy and be like 12, because they'll be like, fuck you can only agree to 5, and boom.
Or wait,
5's better than 0.
Give them 7, or make the first 7 like very much so half measures, but then wait until a month before the election and say, actually, no, we're not going to support you unless you give us Medicare for all, or you give us this thing, or make it even Medicare for all, but a step further. Like, you know what I mean? Like, really threatening him until the very last minute. He doesn't know that he's going to win the election until the week before. You know what I mean? Like, really giving it to him.
And the media would have freaked out.
Yeah.
A lot of liberals would have freaked out, but who gives a fuck, really?
Realistically,
they freak out all the time anyway.
The real leverage would have been Bernie Sanders running as a third party.
Yeah.
Because Howie Hawkins did give his seat. He openly said, I will give my nomination to Bernie Sanders to run as a Green in this election, and he chose not to. So that would have been what I would love to have seen.
Badass.
I don't even give a shit about forcing Joe Biden to the fucking left. But if you weren't going to do that, that's the bare fucking minimum that you were required to do for people, and you chose not to. So they should feel ashamed of themselves, but also we shouldn't be surprised in the sense of we're talking about a military budget, we're talking about the Pentagon budget. They're not ashamed of themselves. Like, the progressives and Bernie have shown multiple times, and I'll share the episode that we did on imperialism on the channel too. So if you haven't seen that, go check out that episode. But we talked about the history of the Democratic Party and the history of Bernie not supporting, Palestine, and not support, and being very much so hawkish. And then we have the progressives voting for the Iron Dome, and we have, this is not a surprising thing. This is what they've been doing especially since Joe Biden has got elected and has won the nomination. They've been doing things like this. Bernie for much longer of a time, but the progressives have also been doing this. So in relation to the military budget, I'm sure we won't hear them say shit about it. And I'm sure that they don't feel like,
or they'll tweet,
they don't feel
bad
about it. These people are imperialists. They don't give a shit. Like, democratic socialists are imperialists. They still believe in this idea of capitalism.
Is still imperialism,
this idea of capitalism that's just, I don't know, that is so deeply ingrained in imperialism that people forget about. So you can't be a democratic socialist and not support some sort of imperialism, which is why you see so many democratic socialists, so many progressives, as they like to self-proclaim, and I'm talking about regular people here, supporting sanctions and supporting, this type of soft military war efforts. It's just, it's becoming more normalized. And these people, these politicians and people that look up to these politicians, they're influencing the general population to be okay with these things, and helping to manufacture that consent for things like this. With situations like Ukraine. And we talked about in the other episode about how, US has largely created this Ukraine situation. So it all comes together and wrapped in a really nice little bow at the very end of it. Once you put it all together, and a lot of politics is putting 2 and 2 together. It's the majority of political
Yep.
discussion and discourse. And if you want to, grow your knowledge, honestly, just try to put 2 and 2 together. It'll come together real quick for
we really need like a anti-war movement like the 60s to happen again. Because like the situation is so much worse now than it was then. But now, like since that was shut down, the media has consolidated, the military industrial complex has grown because, every president, they're bought by them and they increase the military budget every single term, every single year
Yeah.
in their term as well. And so it's hard to get something like that going because the media will not cover you.
And people are just like with inflation and gas prices and
Oh yeah.
not having jobs, and people are just too tired. Honestly, people are burnt out from their regular home lives. They're trying to make help their families survive.
We've been so degraded here at home that giving a shit about other people in other countries isn't even a thought in a lot of people's heads.
Like capitalism teaches you to be individualistic, but the results of capitalism force people to be so individualistic. Like, yeah,
Right.
like we're all taught from when we're little to like only care about yourself, or you're like given these really small subliminal messages about, you're the only one that's there for you and you can do things by yourself and don't let anyone, all these different messages. But then you actually have capitalism materially making you have to only focus on yourself because you can't worry about anyone else. You can't help anyone else when you can't even help yourself. And that's just where we're at. I do want to shout out the End the Damn Wars movement because they're doing another protest on April 10th about the Ukraine stuff and everything. Nice. And it's a really cool ideas of like a pots and pans action. So that everyone's bringing pots and pans and they're going to make a bunch of noise in DC. I don't know. It seems like a really cool thing. And I think that's the closest thing that we've had to an anti-war movement because it does also include folks from all political ideologies that are genuinely, principled against war itself. So I do want to shout them out because they're doing pretty good work as far as like, but I get what you're saying as far as like a broad anti-war movement. I understand, but it seems like maybe
a cultural thing as well, because that was like
seems like they're doing the best they can with what capacities people have right now. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have a more like, hey, this is generally unacceptable to just like support war because Joe Biden tells you to, or the squad tells you to, whatever, or it just fits the mainstream trend of discussion, that's happening on social media. So, I feel you on that. Anything else you want to add to the story?
No.
Cool. No, I think we covered it pretty well. Yeah, cool. So next we're going to talk more about Joe Biden's proposed budget things because Joe Biden proposed a $32 billion increase in spending to fund the police. So we're going to talk about that next. And we have a really good Axios article to kind of give us context here. So we're going to just be reading off this to give y'all the initial information. And then we probably will add some things to say about this more broadly, but I did also include a lot of really good Instagram posts that I did find during the 2020 George Floyd situation, but they help explain, prison abolition, police abolition, and they are mostly from either Black activists or people of color. So I wanted to shout out those, and just read through those as a response to this because we both agree with all those things, but there are folks out there who are actually affected by this issue that are creating really good content around educating people on how to support defunding the police and abolishing the police. So I want to kind of mostly use their words in order to have this discussion. So first, some background is Joe Biden is proposing more than a $32 billion increase in new spending to fight crime. As it says, the White House has told Axios that they're putting a price tag on his State of the Union call to fund and not defund the police. So why it matters, they say, is that Biden wants to show Americans that he's addressing rising crime, which threatens Democrats' fortunes in the midterm elections. Rising crime threatens Democrats' fortunes, not funding the police, is what they're trying to say. And the details, it says the budget proposal to be released on Monday will include a $20.6 billion for the next fiscal year for the Department of Justice, discretionary spending on federal law enforcement, crime prevention, and intervention. That's a $2 billion more than the $18.6 billion enacted for the current fiscal year. The proposal would mandate $30 billion in new spending over the next decade on a variety of programs to expand law enforcement and crime prevention. Details on those programs have not been released yet. It also says the expanded discretionary spending would increase resources for federal prosecutors and give additional resources to state and local law enforcement to put more police on the beat. Federal prosecutors are also cops, just saying that. Prosecutors in general are cops, so fuck prosecutors. And it would more than double the funding for community policing through the cops hiring program. It would also add $500 million for so-called community violence interventions, a tenfold increase. It would pay for nearly 300 new deputy marshals and related personnel. And it would pay for 140 Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive agents and investigators working on gun trafficking, strike forces in 5 major U.S. cities, and 160 ATF investigators working on gun dealer compliance. It would significantly increase funds for law enforcement agencies to trace firearms found at crime scenes. But reading between the lines here, the president has been looking for ways to distance himself from progressives over how to combat crime and to convince swing voters he understands their concerns about feeling unsafe. So he's trying to move away from that defund the police kind of discussion. In his State of the Union address, he said, "We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police, it's to fund the police. Fund them with resources and training." So there you go. It says the big picture here is the overall budget Biden is set to unveil is expected to propose increases across defense and non-defense spending and a billionaire's tax to pay for $1 trillion in deficit reduction over a decade. So that just kind of it continues to go on to some more stuff. But yeah, so Joe Biden is increasing police funding because he wants to distance himself from the idea of defunding the police, which I would like to say, as a result of our first story, we found out progressives and most progressive politicians, I would say, do not support defunding the police, even if they say that they do. They do not. And I think most progressive regular people probably say that they do, but also don't, because it was popular at the time. But yeah, if you're more of like a radical leftist or, socialist, communist, you also just don't believe in police at all. And you don't believe in prisons at all. So, defunding the police is like the bare minimum that we could ask for. So yeah, Joe Biden does not support that. Everything that happened, I ranted about this in the first story too, but everything that happened in 2020 meant nothing. It got us nothing. Voting for Joe Biden got us nothing. They're still disappearing activists. They're still not for protecting Black people. They're still for police violence, state-sanctioned violence. The squad fucking voted for increasing the Capitol Police budget. So which directly resulted in Indigenous people who were protesting Line 3 getting beaten and brutalized just weeks after that. So yeah, like
Jesus Christ.
they're all a part of this game. It's not all progressives that, especially progressive politicians, they don't support this. If they did, they wouldn't have voted for it. But they're playing along with that rotating villain game, and they're playing along with that ratchet effect. They're trying to move. Defunding the police was so popular in 2020 that they're trying to move people away from it.
Yep.
So
that thing he said about like they need funding and training.
Uh-huh.
What kind of training? Is it the same training that got George Floyd killed? Is it the same training that got thousands of other people killed? Like, I just, wow.
Yeah.
Holy fuck.
Yep.
And so how if you're gonna fund the police more and militarize them more, then from the viewpoint of a strategist or somebody in the Democratic Party. Isn't that just going to lead to another situation like that where there's going to be another time of unrest and just outrage? I this is just, it's not only wrong and grotesque, but it's also just very stupid.
So I'm gonna put up on the screen.
Feels unsafe?
I don't know.
What swing voter feels unsafe? Like, do you really feel unsafe, Carrie? Wine mom, shut the fuck up, dude.
Yeah.
This country, man, I swear to fuck.
And they're so like they see like protesting and rioting as like a threat to them. You know what I'm saying? Right. Like, I don't know. It's just it's a really weird thing. I'm going to share.
They're those people that, like, when a shooting happens, they're like, it's getting closer.
Yeah.
Shut up, dude.
I'm going to share my screen on some of these things because I want y'all to be able to see these Instagram posts that I'm going to pull up. But you were just talking about defunding the police and all of that. So I wanted to pull up this one first. It says, wondering what a future without police looks like. And be sure to check these Instagram pages out and give them a follow. So it says, first reminder, police reform doesn't work. You were just talking about this. Police reform doesn't work. Training doesn't work. The Minneapolis police force, which was the police force that killed George Floyd, implemented trainings on implicit bias, mindfulness, de-escalation, and crisis intervention, and diversified the department's leadership, created tighter use of force standards, adopted body cameras, initiated a series of police community dialogues, and enhanced early warning signs to identify police officers. And this still happened. This was all before the George Floyd incident. Again, it says the solution is to defund the police. Municipalities could change policies so social service workers, not the police, are dispatched for certain kinds of 911 calls for people that are in housing crisis, for domestic violence, for drug use, for any of these different issues. There's, the list goes on and on of what social workers could be called in for. Social workers, there's also a lot of bias that happens in social workers, so a lot of people do not support social workers being called as well, because social workers are typically very they aren't very connected to a lot of communities either. There's a lot of times when social service workers can just like take children from parents without you know what I'm saying?
Good God.
They're more willing to call CPS.
Chill out, bro.
They're more willing to do those things. So there are issues with social workers, but the large idea here is that we can learn to lean on each other as communities. Like, capitalism and the government has taught us to hate each other.
Whoa, don't talk about that.
To hate each
other.
Are
you
an
evil communist?
I am.
Fuck.
I am in my villain era.
Coming.
But they've taught us to like hate our communities, to hate our neighbors, to be scared of each other. When if something happens and I'm in crisis, like, my grandfather just died and our neighbor was, super willing to offer support to us and stuff like that. Like, and I know that's not necessarily a police related issue, but also that like your neighbors care about you, like your communities care about you, especially if you know them and you're familiar with them. So that's why we always tell y'all, like, introduce yourself to your neighbors and talk about communism and things with them, and maybe even don't, but just know who they are. Like, create safety plans for your neighborhood. These things don't have to be involved with police. Police don't have to be a part of the discussion. It says that's only part of it is next. It said we need a massive redistribution of funds. Defunding the police also means redistributing those funds to Black communities, primarily Black communities. Dallas is pioneering a new approach where social workers are being dispatched to some 911 calls that involve mental health emergencies. The program has shown success, and many people receive care that they never would have gotten in jails or overcrowded hospitals. So good results in Dallas. Here's another idea. Imagine if the money used to pay the salaries of police officers who endlessly patrol public housing buildings and harass residents can be used to fund plans that residents design to keep themselves safe. The money could also pay for the salaries of maintenance and custodial workers, fund community programs, employment, and universal basic income, or pay for upgrades to elevators in apartment units so residents are not stuck without gas during a pandemic, as some people in Brooklyn were. The movement for Black Lives and other social movements call for this kind of redirection of funds. So yeah, that was a huge thing during this. We need a massive reframing of the way we think about justice. Defunding the police also means community accountability. building like, and also switching from punishment to accountability. Like, it's not all about punishment, it's about holding people accountable. It's about the transformative justice piece of like, this thing happened, we have to care for the people and we have to center healing for the people that were hurt in the situation, but we also have to be willing to help the person that did the harm, that contributed to the harm, grow and help them learn and help them be better, help rehabilitate them. So that's what accountability is all about. It's not all about punishment all the time. This part can be harder for white people to wrap their heads around because we've never had to rely on our communities for our own safety. So yeah, like a lot of Black communities, they don't, I would say every Black community, they don't trust police. Like, they're not going to call police when they have an issue. They're going to call their neighbor. They're going to call their friend down the street. They're going to call their family members. Like, white people frequently, and a lot of other, communities frequently call the police whenever we see a suspicious, you see Karens all the time calling police on fucking children having lemonade stands. Like, we call the police for everything. So yeah, we can't wrap our heads around these ideas a lot of time. This tweet says, today in Minneapolis, I saw free hot food stations, mutual aid stations giving away diapers and formula, medic trainings, people watching other people's kids like they're in their town, knowing they are their own. The alternatives to policing are already here, and they have been. And yes, like, mutual aid is the way to move forward. This is what we're talking about, except mutual aid can also be a lot of different things. Like, mutual aid is everything. So that's that article, and I wanted to bring up a few more, but we'll share those. Do you want to comment on any more of what we just talked about? And I'll try to find some other ones.
No, that was really good.
So yeah, that's a good one. So this one says, why do people say defund the police? So I'm going to read through this. This is the Slacktivist page. So yeah, check this one out as well. Maybe I'll just pull all of them up and then share my screen so we can all look at them as well. We're going to talk a little bit about prison abolition as well. Because that's a huge part of it too. And maybe we'll talk about this one after, about cities that have defunded their police, because there are some cities that have done it. And it has worked out very well for them. So, and then I also want to talk a little bit about prison abolition or police abolition, basically abolitionist dilemma with these things as well, because there is a little bit of dilemma when it comes to holding certain, police officers or people that do harm accountable. A lot of times, different certain liberals will, they were excited when Derek Chauvin was arrested, but it's like, that's also an issue in and of itself. So we'll talk about that too. But this one says, why do people say defund the police? In the last few days, you might have seen defund the police trending. This was, again, stuff that was from 2020. So what does it mean to defund the police? Defunding the police means reducing police budgets and power on a local and state level and investing that money directly into poor communities of color through public services. Why should we defund the police? Again, reforming the police is not working. It's not possible. Police reforms or procedural reforms are changes to police department protocols like explicit bias training, mindfulness, and police community measures. Sorry. These procedural changes cost cities millions and even billions of dollars, like in New York City. Minneapolis was a model for progressive policing reform, but those efforts have been ineffective at stopping police abuse. In the last 40 years, police power and jurisdiction have expanded massively, especially in poor communities of color. Police responses don't serve the best interests of poor communities of color. Police answer to mismanaged schools, school policing, inadequate mental health services, police drug overdose, criminalized users. So the police have historically adopted a hostile and aggressive war on crime. So a lot of times when they come into these, cities, they respond by putting greater police presence in them, and granting them like managerial authority. So again, like, we're used to calling the police, but these other communities are not, because they're coming into their communities and they're disrupting them. They're not actually there to help protect them. or do anything to engage in the community. So that's one of them. This one is about like no like cop propaganda and how much it's like it's such bullshit.
Oh yeah.
So pigs hugging and kneeling with protesters is such a counterinsurgency tactic designed to quell and neutralize rebellion. Do not fall for it. They're kneeling and then shooting, beating and tear gassing people right after the photo op is done. Fuck the police. Yes. Saturday night. This is from 2020. Pictures from 2020. So that was Saturday night at one protest, and Sunday night or Sunday afternoon the next day. They were kneeling with them. So this is not solidarity. Cops have never fought and never will fight for Black lives or liberation. They're very much so involved in like protecting private property. They're an extension of like a very capitalistic like system. That's what they were created for. Technically, like slaves in that time were considered property. So they're based on protecting property. And that's why you see so much stuff about like rioting and how awful that is too. Says there are no good cops, smiling, hugging, or kneeling. Every cop is part of a violent institution designed to cage, control, or kill Black people and poor people. These cops will deploy tear gas and flash bang grenades against demonstrators again tonight because that's what the police were built for. No reforming it. The only way cops can show solidarity is by quitting their jobs and joining the work for abolition. So yeah, like can't reform them. There are no good cops. This is a really good one too. The underlying principle of police reform is that the idea that the institution of police is perfectible. This notion depicts police, whether good or bad, today as essential and always on the path of improvement for tomorrow. So this notion like gives you the idea that police are essential. We can't get rid of them. We just have to figure out how to work with it. Like there's no other solution because we've never had it that way. To hold police accountable is to assume that police as an institution is necessary and required in the first place, which in many different instances, it's not. Me and Anthony were just looking the other day about how many, like what the ratio of people that did violent crime are in federal prisons and state prisons. It's insane, the difference between the two. Like majority of, prisoners in state prisons and federal prisons. Did we look at the difference between the two?
Federal prisons was like the really egregious.
Yeah, federal was crazy.
70% of people in federal prisons are.
But even the state was crazy when you really think about it. Like, if you really think about what all is considered a violent offense, you know what I mean? Like my mom said, robbery is a violent offense. With a weapon, even if you didn't use the weapon. Having the weapon can be considered, it can be considered that. So that's just crazy. Police reform then is mostly about reforming the public's view and the legitimacy of the police and politician support for it. So that's one part of it. I'm just showing a certain amount of these because all these posts are kind of long, but you should definitely check them out more as well. I can try to link all of these too in the description below for y'all. But then this one says, I want to talk about this, but has any city ever defunded their police? Yes. So it's Camden, New Jersey. They were one of the nation's first considered like dangerous cities, most dangerous cities. And in 2012, Honduras was the most violent country on earth. Camden's murder rate exceeded that. So 3 of the last 7 city mayors ended up in federal prison, and there was a high unemployment rate, low graduation rate, and drug use and high crime. So
what were the mayor just like political
I have
crimes?
I have no idea. It doesn't say that in this. But you should look it up.
They just put that on there.
I know.
Like for what? Like did they go out and just start like
probably for corruption? It seems like a lot of these people, like it says, there was high unemployment, there was low graduation. It seems like a lot of these cities weren't being run with the most like care. So it probably was white collar crime.
I was just wondering because like it kind of made it seem like maybe I was just being stupid. Like they were like the mayors went out and did something like they went out and did some like illegal shit
on the streets.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I think
like on the streets.
I'm not sure, but I would assume that maybe it's like white collar crime stuff. Just because it seems like the city wasn't taken care of. There was like
my bad.
low, very high unemployment, and it just wasn't taken care of. But in 2012, they completely eliminated and rebuilt their police force. So every single officer is fired. New psych tests and requirements were issued in order to be rehired, and the use of force policy was revamped with input from the ACLU and academics, and there was an emphasis on de-escalation training and focus on firing their gun as little as possible was the priority. community involvement and engagement allowed humanization on both sides to occur. So a lot of times in these trainings with police, they're taught to like never pull out what is it like never pull out your gun unless you're ready to shoot it or something, like shoot to kill,
something like that.
shoot to kill. Like they're not taught in de-escalation, all these different things. So they're they're legit trained. Like you see these cops dealing with very low grade situations, but they're trained to pull it out.
They're trained to be scared of their own shadow.
They're trained to pull it out regardless. Yeah, scared of their own shadow. So it seems like they had, really retrained a lot of that, which is good. Cool. Brutality numbers started to decrease over time. Last year, there were only 3 excessive force complaints against the Camden Police Department. Solved rates in murder cases increased from 16% to 61%. Damn. And gun seizures increased overall. So Camden crime was lowered by 40%. So it can be done.
That's impressive.
So in this instance, they did defund their police department and then kind of revamped it. So they didn't get rid of their police department. They still had police. They just genuinely changed a lot of the training aspects, but they also just fucking fired everyone. Like, I think that's the big thing about it. They weren't keeping police officers who are deeply racist, who are deeply like aggressive, violent people. They just fired all of them, and you had to meet certain psychological tests. You had to do so much training. Like, that's police officers, you'd think, like, I had to go to school. Doctors have to go to school for 10 to 10 years to not kill people. And police officers are out on the streets with people all the time and are taught to just kill people all the time and have to go to school for what, a few fucking months? Have to be trained for a few fucking months and have no psych tests and no, so that's just a really cool example of it. We don't believe in police at all, but I mean, that's a really good example of just simply defunding the police. Let me look at a few others just in case.
They don't stop crimes. They call them. They get there 7 minutes later.
Right. And then this one says how poverty is criminalized. This is the last one that we'll do, and then I want to go into a little bit of prison and police abolition and talk about some of the dilemmas there in that argument, and then also go into just kind of what it is as well. So how poverty is criminalized: busted headlight, you can't pay it, so you have a suspended license, you drive illegally or you lose your job, and then you have to pay money for bail or stay in jail. So under the money bail system, poor people are treated guilty because they can't post bail. The cost of pretrial incarceration is high. Cases can take years to resolve and often bring innocent people to plead guilty. A few days in jail can cost someone their job, housing, children, and even their life. So this is just one example of it.
Public defenders are jokes.
Fair, yes, true. But this is just one example of it because this shows that police often are told like they're there to protect and serve. Like, they actually don't solve. Like, a lot of times when people talk about police or prison abolition, they talk about who are you going to call when you have something going on. It's like 90% of the time police arrive to a scene after a crime is done. They don't stop crime from happening. That only happens in TV shows, guys. Stop watching Law and Order. That never happens in real life. And other than that, what they're doing, if they're not showing up to a crime after the crime has been committed, they are busting people for things like broken headlights or adding to it, or they're like getting people for busted headlights, speeding, shit like that. So, and then that goes down that rabbit hole of how continuing to not be able to pay your ticket or, having a suspended license and having to get that back. And a lot of communities don't have public transportation, especially rural communities. They don't have public transportation. Or it's just extremely expensive for some people. It's not realistic.
I think about them having quotas. True.
I think it is. I've always heard it is.
That shit's crazy.
Having quotas at the beginning and end of the month. I've always heard that that's true. Okay. So this is a really good one. This kind of goes into prison abolition. This is pretty long, so I won't go deeply into that one, but this is the username, so go look this one up if you want to read more about it. It talks about prison abolition and how that could actually work, and the questions of like, what about bad people, what about rapists, what about all these different things. It kind of goes into how that it's a kind of a myth, a way to scare you into not supporting it. So yeah, I'll leave that one up if you want to go look at it. What does it mean to abolish the police? Now we're going to get into more of like abolishing the police. So Minneapolis is proposing to disband their police. This may seem like a crazy proposition, but let's break it down. What does it mean to abolish the police? Police abolition is one, gradually defunding and disbanding an inherently racist system of forceful socioeconomic control, and two, making space for a new system. Police abolition doesn't mean abolishing all law enforcement, and it is just as much eliminating as it is reimagining. So abolition is creative. Why should we abolish the police? American police originated as slave patrols, which we said. They evolved into what we know today as the institutionalized police force. It's a broken and racist system to begin with. Police procedural reforms are not working. Abolition is a potential end goal for next steps for cities that have defunded their police departments. And it's worked before. Several cities like Durham have implemented successful no cop zones and harm free zones where communities self protect, which is super cool. I'd actually love to read more into that. And then police abolition is not a new idea. It's been around since the 18th century, and it was proposed by Black activists during the civil rights movement. So super cool. That's a little bit about police abolition. So again, it's reimagining your safety as a society, prioritizing community support, and phasing out the dependence on police. So yeah, that's a little bit about that.
I fuck with it.
Me too. Okay, so I want to talk about this. Prison abolition, police abolition. What happens when we see would you consider yourself an abolitionist?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we see
I need
articles,
to be more educated on it, but yeah.
For sure. When we see more articles like this as abolitionists, this makes us think. Derek Chauvin guilty of murder in George Floyd death. Ex-officer may face 40 years in killing that spurred protests. So this just talks about him being, arrested and possibly going to prison, which he was. The prison abolitionist dilemma. When calling for justice in the form of arrest, we are advocating for more continuation of the system that we are trying to dismantle. We must imagine new ways to achieve justice, free from perpetuating a cycle of violence. Here are a few areas to research more. So again, we're talking about community accountability. We're talking about how continuing to put even police into prisons and this criminal justice system is just a continuation of it. When you're talking about trying to defund the police or get rid of the police because of X, Y, and Z of how communities are hurt, you're just continuing that system to be upheld. When you're talking about continuing to put people who are really struggling in it, who might have done really awful things, but also that's that dilemma of like, yeah, cool, like he murdered someone, yeah, we want to see some justice for that, but I also don't believe in prison. So what's the next step? Like, I don't believe in a prison. If I had it my way, prison wouldn't exist. So what happens with Derek Chauvin? You know what I mean? What happens with those people? So community accountability. Our gut reaction is to call the police when we feel unsafe in our communities, but if police and prison facilitate or perpetuate violence themselves at their core rather than make us safer, we must seek other options. So that's one option to consider. Transformative justice, which I want to touch on a little bit, is a liberatory approach to violence which seeks safety and accountability without relying on alienation, punishment, or state or systemic violence, including incarceration or policing. So transformative justice seeks to provide folks who are experienced with violence with immediate safety and long-term healing and reparations while holding people who commit violence accountable. But accountability requires continuous support. So it's about helping the person who was harmed heal and helping the person that harmed rehabilitate. It requires continuous support. It's still holding them accountable for it, but it's also helping them rehabilitate, because putting someone who hasn't been rehabilitated back out isn't actually solving crime. And that's what happens with prisons. Prisons don't actually solve or lessen crime. It right. Just continues it. So
yeah, it's not
that's
like
a really good one.
You could not be dead in 40 years,
Yeah, there you go. This is a little bit more about transformative justice, restorative justice. So restorative justice views crime as more than breaking the law. It also causes harm to people, relationships, and the community. So a just response must address those harms as well as the wrongdoing. So if parties are willing, the best way to do this is to help them meet to discuss those harms, how to bring a resolution, and other approaches that are available if they are unwilling or unable to meet. Sometimes those meetings may lead to transformational changes in their lives. So right now, the way that the system works is that a crime is committed, the person who committed the crime is put away, and the system does nothing to help those communities heal from that crime that happened, to give them reparations for, their business being broken into and stuff being stolen, their house being broken into, stuff being stolen. Any crime that happens, there's no reparations, there's no conversation, there's no mental health resources, there's no healing given to those people. The solution is simply to put that person in jail and throw away the key, and that's the only solution to the problem. So restorative and transformative justice are such a huge part of abolition and stopping the perpetuation of crime in the criminal justice system. This is another one. It says, just as systemic racism did not end with Trump out of office, it will not end with Chauvin in a cage. Abolishing the carceral system is the only justice I'm interested in. They have sacrificed. This is the part that I love. They have sacrificed Chauvin to keep the system intact. They have sacrificed Chauvin to keep the system intact. They let him go to prison so that people, especially white liberals and people that believe in the Democratic Party, they also believe that Joe Biden being in office would stop police violence. Okay. So these are the same people who believe that, and they have duped those people into believing that putting Chauvin in office was a win, or putting Chauvin in prison was a win. That putting him in prison was the end all be all. It was like, that's what we're going to do. It's a huge win. This is amazing. And you even heard people say the system works. I love the criminal justice system. The system works. And it's like, you're missing the point. So regardless of the outcome, the prison industrial complex has already won. Black people have already lost it. And that's just the situation that perpetuates it. So that's kind of the dilemma of abolitionists and where we're at with those types of situations. It's hard for us to have conversations. And a lot of times when you're talking about liberals and people who believe in the Democrats, like I said, they shamed people into voting for Joe Biden because he was going to stop police violence. He was going to be better than Trump on those issues. And we're seeing that he's not. So that's one section of it. And then the last one that I wanted to mention was the 10 steps to non-optical leader allyship, because in the first story, I talked a lot about how this kind of topic was just, it was just a spectacle. It was just for clout, all those things. So I wanted to talk about how you cannot be a non-optical ally. So understanding what optical allyship is first. That's allyship that only serves at the surface level to perform as an ally. So the second is checking in on your Black friends, family, partners, loved ones, and colleagues. So this is an emotional and traumatic time for those kind of communities in 2020, but it continuously is. This stuff doesn't just happen. It didn't stop in 2020. So the more that you're checking in with them means the more that you can imagine, means more than you can imagine, and ask how you can provide support to them as well. Be prepared to do the work. So understand that coming to terms with your own privilege will not be a pretty or fun experience. It is necessary to feel feelings of guilt, shame, and anger throughout the process. Read up on anti-racist works, not just things like what's that one book? That white privilege book that's written by a white person that everyone made fun of. Not just those, but it says some examples. The following will be essential for your learning: me and white supremacy and how to be an anti-racist. Also looking into some more like Black communist or like Black liberation leaders like Fred Hampton and Malcolm X and those types of folks, because they also talk about racism in the sense of how it has to do with capitalism. So reading into them as well. Avoid sharing content which is traumatic, so videos of Black people being abused or murdered. Donate to funds and support initiatives. Use your dollars. Minnesota Freedom Fund. There's also in Michigan, if you're from Michigan, the Michigan Bail Solidarity Fund, so helping people get out of prison. Put your money where your mouth is. Do not center the narrative around yourself, and keep supporting after the outrage. We have saw people, and I mentioned this in the first story, that people are not talking about this anymore. Politicians are not pandering to this issue anymore, and it's very explicit, and the organizations who have supported this effort are also not doing that anymore as well. Stop supporting organizations that promote hate. Stop supporting organizations that aren't actually fucking doing anything for Black communities and Black people. Like that Congressional Progressive Caucus action list was bullshit. Stop supporting organizations that support that. And then start your long-term strategy. So how are you making long-term impact or affecting change? Can you mentor a young person? Can you talk to your family members? Can you become a trustee for an organization that supports the Black community? Can you offer time to volunteer? Make an effort to do something valuable over a long-term period. And this is, I think, white people also need to take a step back and understand our role in this. And like, we shouldn't be the leaders of these organizations that are doing this work, but try to build out long-term strategy. At least be someone who's paying attention to these things at all times. And then there's some further ratings for you as well. So that was a really good one. One more that I'm just going to point out is that it says discomfort is not dangerous. So talk to your family, talk to your followers, talk to your friends. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to, not know how to have these conversations. Start with the basics. Human life matters. Racism is real. Police brutality is real. Things like that. It doesn't mean that you won't get everything right. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have the conversation. So try your best with these situations. Remember that it's a privilege to learn about racism instead of experiencing it. But that's just kind of I wanted to share those, not to say that, just to share some of the perspectives that happened in 2020, the folks that are actually dealing with these issues in relation, because these are the people that are going to be affected by Joe Biden funding the police. And we have to continue to support them beyond 2020, beyond, the George Floyd situation. And it's just unfortunate that we have a president that made people believe that he was going to do something about police brutality in such a trying time, and then is going to continue to fund the police with a $32 billion increase. That is insane. But we can't get money for healthcare, and we can't get money to put people in housing, and the list goes on. So
there are countries that don't even put $32 billion into their fucking military.
I know.
Think about that.
I hate it here. Let's go somewhere else. I don't know where, but
we're in hell.
We are. This is hell. We do live in hell. Like, America sucks.
Fuck this country.
Anything else you want to add? I know that was an earful. Thank you all for putting up with that little session there, but I thought that was really important to share.
That was great. That was
other people's stuff, and they put it so much better than I could, honestly. So, anything else you have to add about this stuff?
No, I agree with everything that was just said.
Oh,
this shit is ridiculous.
Yes.
I mean, it's egregious with all the socio-economical crises that we have going on. We're funding this kind of shit.
And more military funding, more police funding. It's the Democrats.
Grotesque.
The Democrats have always been supporters of state violence. And they always will be. And that's the one thing. And I'm going to upload our imperialism episode as well. But that's the one consistent that about the Democrats. It really is a consistent that you can always expect regardless of who the president is. So, And even you see that with Bernie and the progressives. So even if Bernie was president, we still probably would have, maybe not to this extent. Maybe it would have been less money. You still would have seen probably an increase though. So, but that's it for this episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We're looking forward to being on a more consistent schedule, probably uploading on Mondays now on our channel. So look out for that, and let us know in the comments what you like, what you didn't like, what you want us to talk about, any guests you want us to try to have on. And we will see y'all next week. Don't forget also to like, subscribe, check out the description because I'm going to have some mutual aid funds down there, and the two-party system network information, so y'all can watch our show on that as well, and the other shows that are on that channel. And we will see y'all next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Bye everyone.
Bye.